Chapter 1, Warning Signs. Any seasoned captain worth his salt-nosed trouble doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It creeps up like fog on a calm morning. Bob Crawford understood this truth in his bones. 20 years commanding destroyers in the Navy had taught him to read danger like scripture. These days, he kept watch from Blue Point Lighthouse instead of a bridge, trading naval charts for weather patterns. His wife Sarah dedicated herself to studying the gentle giants that sang their ancient ballads in the deep waters surrounding their island home. Life was good. Bob, Sarah, and his mother Margaret formed a content trio, until a smooth-talking scientist with a shark smile and a businessman's agenda set foot on their dock. James Sterling wouldn't arrive for several hours yet, and those final moments ticked by like sand through an hourglass, marking the end of everything they'd known. Pain shot through Bob's leg, waking him before dawn. That damned piece of metal always acted up when weather was brewing. The Persian Gulf had left its mark when his destroyer caught a mine broadside. 3 good men went down that night, and their faces still visited him when storms rolled in. Just like that godforsaken night, he reflected. Same oily black water topped with foam, grinning like death itself. He limped to the window. Sarah's side of the bed lay empty. She never missed her dawn observations, weather be damned. That was his wife all over, obsessed with her whales, willing to stand in driving rain for hours with binoculars and notebooks. Sometimes Bob figured she understood those massive creatures better than she did people. Hell, maybe that's why she'd married him. He had something of the whale about him too, that quiet steadiness and loyalty to chosen waters. The lighthouse groaned against strengthening winds. Bob climbed to the watchroom, where everything sat precisely where it belonged. He maintained the same shipshape order here as he had on his last command bridge. The lenses gleamed spotless, cleaned last night, as every night for 5 years running. The logbook lay open to today's entry. Dawn struggled through heavy clouds when he spotted them. Whales, moving wrong, nothing like their usual patterns. Bob had watched these majestic beasts countless times. They were part of his morning routine, steady as black coffee and fresh log entries. Today was different. The humpbacks, normally dignified and predictable in their travels, thrashed like spooked horses. 5 of them. No, 7. Diving deep then surfacing again as if fleeing something unseen. Margaret climbed the stairs carrying a thermos. At 68, she still carried herself like the successful Boston attorney she'd been before her husband passed. Bob remembered the day she'd appeared at the lighthouse door with one suitcase, announcing, "Son, I can't live in that city anymore. The sea took your father, now it needs to take care of me." She'd become essential to their small world, bringing wisdom and sharp insight. "Something's wrong with those whales," she stated without even looking seaward. Margaret always knew. Just knew, period. The door slammed below Sarah, returning from her observations. Her hurried footsteps on the stairs told them something significant had happened. She burst in, red hair wild from wind, eyes blazing with that particular fire that meant discovery. Cheeks flushed from cold morning air, waterproof notebook clutched in her hands, her constant companion. "Bob, Margaret, you won't believe." She paused, catching her breath. "The whales are changing their migration route. All my data from this past week confirms it. They're fleeing something to the east, something's frightening them." "Something's frightening them," echoed in Bob's mind. Like in the Gulf, when dolphins vanished the day before enemy patrol boats appeared. The sky continued darkening. Waves grew higher, wind strengthened, bringing the smell of approaching storm. Bob reached for his binoculars and froze. A mile offshore, a small research vessel struggled against the elements. "They're heading straight for the reef. She'll be matchsticks in minutes," Sarah exclaimed, spotting the vessel too. Blue Point's reefs were treacherous. They lurked beneath the surface like predators, ready to gut any ship foolish enough to venture too close. Through the rising wind came a distress signal. Bob was already descending, grimacing at his leg's protest. Old reflexes kicked in, instantly damaged leg or not, duty came first. "I'm coming with you," Sarah shouted. "No," he cut her off. "Margaret, radio the Coast Guard. Sarah, maintain communication." The rescue took nearly 2 hours. When Bob finally returned, they gathered in the lighthouse parlor. Fire crackled in the hearth, steam rose from teacups, and in the armchair sat their rescued passenger, a young man with movie star looks and blue blood manners. "Dr. James Sterling," he introduced himself, radiating charm like the lighthouse beamed light. "From the Oceanographic Institute. I'm here about your research, Mrs. Crawford, particularly interested in your whale migration data and deep current mapping systems." Margaret, settled in her favorite fireside chair, frowned subtly. 30 years of legal practice had taught her to recognize false notes in voices. Something in Sterling's tone scraped her ear like a splinter. She didn't know, not yet, that this splinter would soon become a knife aimed at their family's heart. Outside, the storm raged and whales had fled to deeper waters, taking their warnings with them. But in the cozy lighthouse parlor on Blue Point Island, a story began that would change their lives forever. A story of love and betrayal, duty and temptation, how easily we lose ourselves and how hard the journey home can be. Chapter 2: The Charm Offensive. A week passed since that stormy morning when James Sterling washed up on their shore. 7 days that subtly shifted the lighthouse inhabitants' routine, like waves imperceptibly eroding coastal rocks. Sarah spent increasing hours in her research lab, converted from an old fisherman's shack by the pier, while Bob stared longer at the horizon, as if trying to spot an approaching storm. Sailors know the most dangerous weather doesn't arrive with thunder and fury, but creeps in on cat's paws, deceptively gentle until it's too late. "Look at this data, Sarah." Sterling's voice flowed like honey over sandpaper. He leaned over the computer, shoulder nearly touching hers. Screens flickered with migration patterns, temperature maps, sonar readings. "We're on the verge of something monumental. Your observations from recent years, they're the missing puzzle piece." Sarah felt his breath on her cheek, caught a hint of expensive cologne. James was nothing like the locals' polished smooth as beach glass, gleaming with academic credentials and sophisticated manners. Later, much later, she'd understand. Pebbles become smooth because the ocean pounds them against rocks for ages, washing away everything organic. "Look here," his fingers danced across the keyboard, opening new data windows. "If we overlay your whale behavior records on deep current maps, remarkable. Do you realize what this means?" Of course she understood. 15 years of observations, endless hours at sea in any weather, thousands of notes in waterlogged journals. Suddenly, it all gained new meaning in light of his theories. Bob noticed changes in his wife gradually. First came small things: cold dinners, forgotten kettles, the unread book on her nightstand, the one she used to reread every anniversary. Then she started returning later, with shining eyes and distracted smiles. "James showed me incredible modeling results," she'd say, gesturing excitedly like in their early days together. "Can you imagine? We can prove connections between whale behavior changes and global oceanic processes." Bob remembered different enthusiasm in her voice. When she first saw the lighthouse, when they planned their life here, when they dreamed of a future that now seemed distant. Margaret watched developments with an old watchdog's wariness. Her legal instincts, honed by years dealing with human weaknesses and vices, sounded alarms. One evening, passing the lab late, she noticed Sterling photographing documents on Sarah's desk when he thought nobody was watching. "Just making copies for the Institute," he explained next day with a disarming smile. "Bureaucracy, you know, everything must be documented." The smile was perfect, too perfect, like a fresh headstone on a new grave. The first serious argument between Bob and Sarah erupted Friday evening when she missed their traditional family dinner. "You're spending too much time with this Sterling character," Bob said, keeping his voice level. "Don't start," she snapped. This is important research, maybe the most important of my career. Why can't you be happy for me? Because something's off here, he paused, choosing words carefully. I've seen plenty of storms, Sarah, and I feel a big one coming. She laughed, but the sound held an unfamiliar note. You're just jealous. James is a brilliant scientist with connections to the world's best research centers. He can help my work gain recognition. You sure it's just about work? The words escaped before he could stop them. Sarah froze as if slapped. Then she spun and left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle windows. That night Bob stood long on the lighthouse platform, watching lights in the pier laboratory. There, bent over computers, Sarah and Sterling studied data. Their silhouettes occasionally appeared in the window, too close together for simple professional collaboration. He's playing on her ambitions. Margaret's voice made him jump. He hadn't heard his mother climb up. I've seen this before. Smart women are especially vulnerable to flattery disguised as professional recognition. Bob stayed silent. He knew his mother rarely misjudged people. He also knew he could do nothing yet. Only watch as his wife drifted further away, dazzled by promises of scientific glory and recognition. The laboratory lights went dark. Minutes later, two figures emerged and Sarah's voice, unusually bright, carried across the quiet harbor. This is incredible, James. Can we really prove it? With your data, absolutely, Sterling replied. You have no idea how important your research is. It could change everything. Chapter 3: Suspicions. Margaret Crawford had spent 30 years finding devils in legal details. She knew the most important things always hid in footnotes, fine print, careless phrasings most people overlooked. That's why she couldn't sleep that night, repeatedly examining copies of research permits Sterling had carelessly left on the kitchen table. Carelessly. In her experience, nothing was accidental. Like ocean currents, everything followed certain laws. You just needed to know where to look. Something was wrong with these documents. Seals were in place, signatures looked flawless, but between the lines lurked something sinister, like reefs beneath smooth water. Conducting comprehensive oceanographic research, rights to collect and analyze data, authorization to install specialized equipment, standard language for a scientific expedition. But then, in additional provisions, she found what she'd been seeking. Good Lord, Margaret whispered, putting on glasses to better read the fine print. There it is. Meanwhile, Bob sat in his old office, set up in one of the lighthouse rooms, conducting an off-the-books radio conversation. The old military transmitter, decommissioned after his discharge, quietly hissed and crackled. Jack Harrison, this is Bob Crawford. Yeah, from the Gulf. Listen, I need a favor. Can you run a check on someone, James Sterling from the Oceanographic Institute? He and Jack had served together on a destroyer. Jack now worked corporate security, and his database access was, let's say, broader than official channels. In the pier laboratory, Sarah and Sterling hunched over fresh sonar data. Strange shadows danced on the computer screen, unusual silhouettes of large marine creatures for these waters. This can't be a normal pod, Sarah tapped her pencil nervously on the desk. The movement pattern's different and the sizes. What if it's them? Sterling moved closer, his breath tickling her ear. The ones thought extinct. Her heart raced. An extinct whale species here off their island. It would be the discovery of the century, forever linking her name to science. The night was moonless. They went a-sea in a small boat Sterling had rented for night observations. Waves gently rocked the vessel, stars reflected in dark water, creating an illusion of infinity, as if they sailed not on the ocean but among constellations. Look, Sterling whispered, pointing at the hydrolocator's glowing screen. They're right beneath us. Sarah held her breath. From the depths came singing ancient, inhumanly beautiful. Whales communicating, and their song held a troubling note she'd never heard before. Incredible, Sterling moved even closer. His eyes gleamed strangely in the darkness. "Do you realize we're making history?" His hand settled on her shoulder, and Sarah suddenly realized she didn't want to pull away. Here, in the middle of the night ocean, reality seemed as hazy as sea fog. His lips drew nearer. That night on the boat, their relationship ceased being purely professional. Later she'd replay this moment endlessly, trying to understand when exactly she'd crossed the line. At the lighthouse, Margaret finally found what she'd been looking for. Between legal formulations hid rights to conduct preparatory work for assessing potential industrial utilization of waters. An innocent-seeming phrase, but she knew what these words meant in corporate lawyer speak. She went down to make coffee and froze at the window. A light glimmered in the ocean darkness, Sterling's boat. Out there, her daughter-in-law seemed to be losing herself in a dangerous game with a man whose true intentions grew clearer. Bob wasn't sleeping either. Jack had sent initial background check results, and they were troubling. Sterling did work at the Oceanographic Institute, but his research was funded through a complex web of shell companies. All threads led to one source, Pacific Maritime Holdings, a company far more interested in money than science. Big money. "Be careful, Bob," Jack had warned. "These guys don't like people poking around their business. They've got people everywhere: government, scientific circles, even the Coast Guard." In the morning, Margaret tried talking to her son. She found him on the observation deck watching Sterling's boat return to harbor. Sarah stood on deck, red hair whipping in the morning wind. Even from distance, they could see her laughing at something Sterling said. "Son," Margaret began, handing him the documents, "you need to see this." But before she could finish, Sarah's excited voice rose from below. "Bob, Margaret, come quickly, we have amazing news." At that moment, none of them knew these news would begin the end of their familiar world. As any sailor would say, calm before the storm is especially deceptive. Chapter 4: Truth. Truth is like the tide. You can hold it back for a while, but eventually it'll cover the whole shore. Bob Crawford learned this at dawn, when the military transmitter buzzed and Jack Harrison's voice cut through the lighthouse's pre-dawn quiet. Some news is better received standing. Like a gunshot or gut punch, if you're going to fall, at least fall from your own height. "Bob, you sitting down. Better take a seat." His old friend's voice sounded strained. "I dug up more about your Sterling and his employers. This is way bigger than we thought." Pacific Maritime Holdings. Bob remembered that company. 3 years ago they'd built a deepwater port on the Oregon coast. Local fishermen said the fish left after that. Whales and dolphins stopped coming to the bay. Environmentalists protested, but their voices drowned in bulldozer noise and clinking coins. "They're planning the same thing there, Bob. Tanker terminal, port facilities, industrial zone. All of it perpetually slicked with oil and fuel. Your island's perfect. Deep water, protected harbor, minimal local population." Bob watched the first rays paint the ocean blood red. "Red sky at morning, sailors take warning." The old saying never seemed more apt. "And Sterling?" he asked, though he already knew. "He's their man, specializes in, let's say, site preparation. Finds weak spots, gains trust. He's got 3 ports and 2 destroyed sanctuaries behind him, not one real scientific study." Downstairs the door slammed. Sarah returning from another night observation. Her steps on the stairs sounded light, almost dancing. She'd been happy these past days, too happy. Bob descended to the kitchen, where Margaret was already making breakfast. One look at his face told her it was time to act. "I found documents about construction plans." She pulled a folder from under cookbooks. "They're not even hiding it much, just using terms a normal person wouldn't understand without a legal dictionary." Sarah entered humming, cheeks flushed from morning air, eyes sparkling. Bob felt his heart clench. He knew he was about to shatter her happy world. "We need to talk." His voice came out rougher than intended. "Of course," she smiled, reaching for a cup. James showed me amazing modeling results. We can publish my paper in. James Sterling isn't who he claims to be. The cup froze halfway to the table. Sarah slowly turned to her husband. What are you talking about? He works for Pacific Maritime Holdings. All this, his research, interest in your work, it's just cover. They plan to build a cargo tanker port here. Sarah laughed, but uncertainly. That's ridiculous. Nonsense. You're just jealous. James is a respected scientist who's never published a single scientific paper. Bob spread Jack's printouts on the table. But he's got rich experience destroying coastal ecosystems. I don't believe it, but her voice wavered. He showed me his research. Fakes. Margaret placed the document folder before her. Like these permits. Look here and here, veiled language about industrial use of territory. Sarah sat as if her legs gave out. She scanned the documents, color gradually draining from her face. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Her phone rang. Sterling's name appeared on screen. Sarah, his voice sounded excited and joyful. I have amazing news. The Institute's ready to publish our joint research in next month's Oceanographic Review. This is a breakthrough. We need to meet, discuss details. She looked at her husband, then at the documents, then back at the phone. Fear swam in her eyes, fear of someone who suddenly realized they'd been walking on thin ice and now heard the first treacherous crack beneath their feet. And besides, she couldn't just erase last night on the boat from her life. I'll call back. Her voice sounded hoarse. In the ensuing silence, they could hear waves beating against rocks below. Somewhere in the distance, gulls cried. Their calls seemed like weeping. It's all my work, Sarah whispered. My research, 15 years of observations, so he just used me. Used us all, Margaret gently corrected. But the game's not over. At that moment, through the window they saw Sterling's boat approaching the pier. He climbed the path to the lighthouse fit, confident, wearing his unchanging smile. A man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Some people are like sharks. They never stop moving, never get satisfied, and never feel remorse. But even sharks sometimes get caught in experienced fishermen's nets. Chapter 5: The Choice. They say before making life's most important decision, you should listen to your heart. But what if your heart's torn between truth and lies, between duty and temptation? Sarah Crawford learned the answer that gray morning when the sea brought her one last gift. The ocean's gifts don't always come wrapped pretty. Sometimes they arrive as a choice between two equally painful paths. She went to sea before dawn, alone, for the first time in weeks without Sterling's company. Her small boat glided over waves like a ghost, while fragments of yesterday's conversation with Bob spun in her head. The documents he'd shown burned her memory like acid. The sun's first ray barely touched the horizon when she saw them. First just a splash, unusual, unlike familiar whale movements. Then another, and another. My God, Sarah whispered, grabbing her camera. They rose from the depths like ancient deities, enormous, majestic, unlike any known species. Their skin gleamed silver in morning light, distinctive markings on their backs forming patterns she'd seen before only in old engravings. There exist moments of absolute clarity when all doubts vanish like fog under morning sun. This was such a moment. With trembling hands, she activated recording equipment. Every splash, every breath, every movement of the titanic bodies, all captured on camera. The species thought extinct was here, right before her, and this changed everything. Returning to the lab, she locked the door and dove into data analysis. The recordings confirmed her guess. These were them. The ancient species considered vanished over half a century ago. Her phone vibrated. Message from Sterling. Where are you? We need to meet. Urgent. Sarah looked at the computer screen where frames of the silver giants were frozen, then at the phone. For the first time in a long while, she saw the situation with crystal clarity. Sterling appeared an hour later. He entered the lab with his usual confident stride, but something in his eyes was different, something predatory. "You were at sea this morning," not a question, a statement. "Yes." "And found something." She hesitated. "Nothing special, regular observations." His smile widened, but his eyes stayed cold. "Come on, Sarah. I saw your boat in that part of the bay where whales don't usually go, and your equipment recorded something for at least 2 hours." He approached, placing hands on her shoulders, a gesture that once made her heart race, now caused only revulsion and anxiety. "You know the corporation's prepared to offer you something special." His voice became soft, enveloping. "Director of Environmental Programs, 7-figure contract, international recognition. In exchange for..." "In exchange, you become the face of our project. Tell the world how we care for the environment, how modern technology can coexist with nature. And these whales..." His fingers squeezed her shoulders slightly harder. "What whales, Sarah? You saw nothing this morning, and if you did..." "You know, a scientist's reputation is fragile, especially when evidence surfaces of data manipulation in previous research." The threat was clear. Sarah felt nausea rising in her throat. At that moment, engine sounds carried from the sea. A large ship entered the bay, not a fishing vessel, something much more serious. "Ah, our specialists have arrived." Sterling moved to the window. "Preliminary seabed research. A formality, really. In a year there'll be a modern deepwater port here. Progress can't be stopped, Sarah." She watched the huge vessel drop anchor in the bay. Deep drilling equipment was visible on deck. "Give me time to think, darling." Her voice sounded level, though everything trembled inside. "Of course." He smiled again and kissed her as if she were his doll. "You have until tomorrow, but remember, some opportunities come only once in a lifetime." When he left, Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed a number unused for years. "Jim, this is Sarah Crawford. Remember you said you're always ready to help. I need advice about publishing. Special data." Old connections are like anchor chains. They rust with time, but in critical moments can keep a ship from wrecking. That evening, looking from the lighthouse window at the research vessel's lights in the bay, she made her decision. Truth was like this lighthouse. Its light could burn, but it showed the way home to lost ships. Bob found her in the lab after midnight. She sat at the computer, methodically copying files. "They're here," she said without turning. "The ancient species, living proof these waters need protection, and I'm going to use that proof. It's dangerous. That bastard's capable of anything. I know, that's why I'm going to play their game. Let them think they've bought me. It'll give us time. Besides, I have another ace up my sleeve regarding Sterling, a very strong one." Bob placed a hand on her shoulder, not possessively like Sterling, but gently, like someone ready to support any decision. "Don't know what you mean, but I know we'll manage," he said. "Together." Chapter 6: Storm. Old sailors say a real storm always arrives suddenly, even if you've been expecting it for weeks. That morning, Bob Crawford understood they were right. The sky darkened in minutes, as if someone up there decided to flip off the lights. Waves, barely noticeable moments before, rose higher and higher, while wind strengthened with frightening speed. Nature knows how to choose her moment, as if she too decided to intervene in this story, to dot all the I's. The Pacific Maritime Holdings research vessel appeared in the bay at dawn, a huge dark mass against leaden clouds. "Ocean Explorer" proclaimed the hull inscription, but Bob knew that name was as fake as James Sterling's scientific credentials. Have they completely lost their minds? Margaret stood beside her son on the lighthouse observation deck, watching the ship trying to anchor. Even fishermen don't go out in weather like this. "They're in a hurry." Bob raised binoculars to his eyes. "See the equipment on deck? That's not for research. They're going to start test drilling for the port foundation." On the Ocean Explorer's deck, people scurried like ants. A massive drill swayed on the crane, ready for deployment. Sterling stood on the bridge beside someone in a business suit, absurd in this maritime chaos. Some people never understand the sea. They think they can conquer it with technology and money, forgetting the ocean existed long before them and will outlive them all. The first gust of storm wind hit the ship's side so hard it noticeably listed. Waves swept over the deck, washing away unsecured equipment. "Bob," Sarah burst onto the platform, breathless from her rapid climb. "I just got data from the weather station. This isn't just a storm, this could be the strongest hurricane in 50 years. As if confirming her words, a new wind gust struck the lighthouse walls, making it tremble slightly. Down in the bay, Ocean Explorer desperately tried to hold position, but anchor chains groaned under strain. The radio crackled to life with a static-filled voice. "Blue Point Lighthouse, come in. This is Ocean Explorer. We have engine problems. Repeat, engine problems." Bob grabbed the microphone. "Copy that. What's your situation?" "Main engine's dead. Backup won't start. Anchor chains might not hold. We have hazardous cargo. Damn." Communication cut off. On the ship's deck, panic began. People ran around trying to secure loose equipment. Sterling shouted something through a megaphone, but his words drowned in the storm's roar. "Hazardous cargo," Margaret paled. "Bob, if they mean what I think." "Fuel for test drilling," he finished. "Tons of chemicals and oil, if the ship breaks on the reefs." "Everything alive in the bay will die," Sarah whispered. "The whales." Bob was already descending the stairs, limping worse than usual. The old wound always acted up in such weather. "Where are you going?" Sarah shouted. "To the rescue boat. They're idiots, but we can't let them dump all their crap here." "I'm coming." "No." "Yes." Her voice held the same steel as before when she decided to play double with Sterling. "I know this bay as well as you, and I have equipment to contact the Coast Guard." Margaret silently handed them both life jackets. She knew arguing was pointless. Stubbornness was a Crawford family trait. The rescue boat rocked at the pier like an unbroken horse. Just boarding was an achievement. Waves threw it side to side, threatening to smash against the pilings. From Ocean Explorer now came siren sounds. In gaps between waves, they could see people hastily donning life jackets. Sterling ran around the bridge, alternately grabbing the radio and shouting at the man in the suit, who now sat on the floor, deathly pale. "Hold on," Bob shouted, steering the boat toward the distressed vessel. A new wave lifted them up, and for a moment they saw the whole scene. Ocean Explorer, listing to starboard, drilling equipment dangling from the crane like a pendulum, and dark silhouettes of reefs, closer and closer to the ship's hull. At sea, seconds stretch into eternity, especially those seconds when you realize, now everything will change forever. The first hull strike on the reef sounded like a gunshot, the second like an explosion. The ship shuddered, and from the bridge came Sterling's cry. "Open the cargo hold or we'll all go down. Lighten the ship, that's an order." Sarah went white. God, no, they wouldn't. Bob saw several people rush to the cargo hold. If they opened it now, all the toxic cargo would spill directly into the bay. "Faster," Sarah shouted, gripping the rails. "Bob, faster." The boat flew on another wave, and they saw a real fight break out on Ocean Explorer's deck. Several crew members trying to prevent opening the cargo hold, while Sterling screamed something at them through the megaphone. Waves tossed their small boat like driftwood, but Bob stubbornly drove it forward. 15 years in the Navy had taught him one thing: sometimes the only way to survive a storm is to head straight into it. Chapter 7: The Battle. There are moments when time slows to thick molasses, and each second stretches into eternity. For Bob Crawford, such a moment arrived when their rescue boat reached Ocean Explorer's side. The ship's enormous hull loomed over them like a black wall, water poured across the deck, and somewhere above, Sterling's men tried to open the cargo hold containing toxic substances. At sea, a man either becomes a hero or perishes. No third option. Bob knew this from the war, but now the stakes were higher than ever. The rope ladder, he roared through the storm's howl. From the ship they threw down a Jacob's ladder, swinging like a pendulum over raging waves. "I'm going first," Sarah shouted, grabbing the wet ropes. Her backpack held a waterproof camera. She understood they'd need evidence. Later she'd marvel at her courage. But in that moment fear seemed distant and unreal, like last night's dream. Climbing to the deck was like ascending into hell. Wind threw them side to side, waves doused them with icy water, and the ship beneath groaned and shuddered from reef impacts. Bob climbed last, grimacing from pain in his shot leg. Chaos reigned on deck. Part of the crew tried securing loose equipment, others prepared lifeboats. At the cargo hold entrance, a real fight raged. Several sailors grappled with men in Pacific Maritime holding suits. "Stop!" Sterling's voice boomed over the deck through a megaphone. "That's an order. Open the damn hold or we'll all go down." He stood on the bridge, no longer polished and confident as usual. Wind had destroyed his perfect hair, his expensive suit was soaked through, and panic swam in his eyes. "If you do this, everything alive in the bay will die for decades," Sarah shouted, making her way to the cargo hold. She'd already pulled out her camera and was filming events. "Shut her up," Sterling pointed two of his men at her. "Get that crazy woman and take the camera." Bob rushed to intercept, but a crew member beat him to it. A young guy with a dolphin tattoo on his neck. "Don't touch her," the sailor shouted. "Captain, they want to kill the bay. These bastards are ready to destroy everything." Blue Point's reefs were treacherous. They lurked underwater like crouching predators, ready to rip open any ship's hull that dared come too close. The ship's actual captain, a gray-haired man with a weathered face, hesitated. On one hand, his ship was in danger. On the other, 15 years at sea had taught him to respect the ocean. "Mr. Sterling," he began but didn't get to finish. Sterling pulled a gun. At that moment another wave struck the ship's side, and everyone on deck fell like bowling pins. Bob saw his chance. Years of military training kicked in automatically. Roll, sweep, and the gun flew overboard. Sterling lunged at him with a snarl, aiming a fist at his face. Fighting on a rolling deck is dancing with death. One wrong step, one imprecise movement, and the ocean claims a new victim. They grappled at the very rail. Sterling fought desperately, like a cornered animal. At one point his hand found a pipe fragment and he swung. "Bob!" Sarah's cry drowned in the storm's roar. The blow glanced off. Military training didn't fail. Bob intercepted Sterling's arm and twisted it behind his back. The pipe clattered across the deck. "Listen, everyone," Sarah's voice carried over the deck. She held her phone like a weapon. "I'm live streaming. Everything's being recorded and uploaded. The Coast Guard's already en route. Everyone will be held accountable for their actions and decisions." Sterling went limp in Bob's grip. His pampered face twisted with rage and fear. "You don't understand," he hissed. "You all don't understand. This is a multi-billion-dollar project. They'll destroy me." "Like you wanted to destroy the bay," Bob twisted his arm harder. "Like you destroyed other sanctuaries." At that moment, helicopter engine roar passed over the deck. The Coast Guard had arrived just in time. The ship listed even more, threatening to capsize. "All prepare for evacuation," a voice from the loudspeaker cut through the storm. "Repeat, all prepare for evacuation." Sarah kept filming as people boarded the rescue helicopter. She captured Sterling being led away in handcuffs, the captain saluting his sinking ship, the young sailor with the dolphin tattoo helping an elderly engineer into the rescue basket. Bob and Sarah boarded the helicopter last. Below, Ocean Explorer continued battling waves, but now its cargo hold was securely sealed, toxic cargo remaining safe. They managed to see silverbacks flash in a gap between waves, the ancient species heading for deep water, fleeing the storm. Sarah gripped her camera tighter. Now she had all the evidence, both Sterling's attempts to destroy the bay and the rare whale's existence. "We did it," she whispered, looking at her husband. Bob nodded silently, holding his shot thigh. Victory hadn't come easy, but it was worth it. Chapter 8: Dawn. After a storm always comes calm. It's nature's law, unchanging as tides. But sometimes calm can be deceptive, especially when it concerns not weather but human passions and corporate intrigues. Some battles don't end when the wind dies. They just move to another level, where instead of waves and wind, legal paragraphs and newspaper headlines. A week passed since Ocean Explorer's dramatic rescue. The ship's wreckage still showed on the reefs, a silent reminder of how close they'd come to catastrophe. The cargo hold, fortunately, remained intact, and a special team of environmentalists worked on safely extracting toxic substances. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, newspapers spread before her. "Pacific Maritime Holdings under investigation," one headline proclaimed. "Environmental scandal of the year, attempt to destroy unique marine ecosystem," another screamed. "They offered a deal," she said when Bob came down for breakfast. "Want to sweep it under the rug." "And what did you tell them?" Bob poured coffee. His limp had worsened after events on the ship, but a new gleam appeared in his eyes. "Same thing I told all my opponents for 30 years of legal practice," Margaret smiled. "Truth isn't for sale." In the Pier laboratory, Sarah finished work on her article. Her discovery had exploded like a bomb in the scientific community. The rarest whale species, thought extinct, not only existed, but had found refuge in the very waters the corporation planned to destroy. "You know," she told Bob as he entered, "James was right about one thing. This really did change everything, just not how he planned." Life's irony. Sometimes our worst enemies become unwitting helpers in achieving our goals. News arrived one after another. James Sterling testified against his employers, hopping for a reduced sentence. His confessions, combined with Sarah's video recordings and Margaret's documents, created irrefutable evidence. "Federal investigation of Pacific Maritime Holdings expands," Margaret read aloud another headline. "Evidence of official bribery and environmental assessment falsification uncovered." Then came the main news: waters around Blue Point Island received marine sanctuary status. The young sailor with the dolphin tattoo played a special role. His testimony about Sterling's attempt to dump toxic substances into the ocean became the final nail in the corporate plan's coffin. That evening they gathered on the lighthouse observation deck. The sun set into the ocean, painting water in gold and purple hues. Somewhere in the distance whale spouts appeared, the family of ancient giants returning to their home waters. "You know," Sarah pressed against her husband's shoulder, "when I first met James, he talked about progress, about how important it is to move forward, but he didn't understand the main thing." "What's that?" "That sometimes progress means leaving something untouched, preserving what nature created." Margaret climbed to the platform, carrying a tray with hot tea cups. The three of them stood there, watching the sun's last rays paint the sky while the lighthouse began its night watch. "I spoke with a publisher," Sarah said after a long silence. "They want me to write a book, not just about whales but about all this, about how greed nearly destroyed a unique ecosystem and how a handful of people managed to stop it." "Write it," Bob hugged her tighter. "People need to know." Below in the bay, whales began their evening song. Their voices, ancient as the ocean itself, carried over the water as if reminding, there are things that can't be measured in money, things worth fighting for. The lighthouse continued sending its light into darkness, guiding ships and protecting the peace of marine giants. Its beam was like an outstretched helping hand to all who needed it, whether lost ship or ancient whale seeking the way home. And in a pretrial detention cell, James Sterling stared through barred windows at the distant lighthouse beam and thought about how one wrong decision can change an entire life. Ahead lay trial and long years of imprisonment, but it was fair punishment for attempting to destroy something priceless for corporate profit. The only black spot of soot on this story's snow-white sheet remained Sarah's small secret about that night with Sterling on the boat. She blamed herself for that moment of weakness, but decided that sometimes a small lie to save something greater is for the good. If you enjoyed this story, support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.